The Lord be with you. The Holy Gospel according to Luke. Jesus said, I have come to cast fire upon the earth, and how I wish it were already ablaze. I have a baptism with which to be baptized, and what constraint I am under until it is completed. Do you think that I have come to bring peace to the earth? No, I tell you, but rather division. From now on, 5 in one household will be divided, 3 against 2, 2 against 3, they will be divided. Father against son, son against father, mother against daughter, and daughter against mother, mother-in-law against her daughter-in-law, and daughter-in-law against mother-in-law. He also said to the crowds, when you see a cloud rising in the west, you immediately say, it's going to rain. And so it happens. And when you see the south wind blowing, you say, there will be scorching heat. And it happens. You hypocrites! You know how to interpret the appearance of earth and sky, but why do you not know how to interpret the present time? And this is the gospel, the good news of our Lord Jesus Christ. So I find this passage incredibly misunderstood. Even, I found out on Tuesday, misunderstood by some pastors. So I think it would be great for us to kind of open this up a little bit and unbox it. I want to ask you to reflect just for a moment on this. In your life, either as a child, an adolescent, an adult, maybe last week, maybe 10 years ago, in your life, did someone ever come to you, especially someone that cared about you, and tell you a truth about yourself? And it might not have been pleasant to hear, but it took bravery for them to tell you that. And you decided either to let that in and maybe do something with that, or you closed up. I don't want to hear it. Who are you to tell me? Interesting thing. This kind of honesty with another person, it just goes down a lot better if they know you care about them. It's a different thing if you barely know them and they tell you a hard truth about yourself. It still might be a truth. We're still called to consider it. When somebody says to you, you know, I've been your friend for a long time, and you're a wonderful person. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been friends with you this long. But you have a tendency to fly off the handle. You have a tendency to get really cranky, grumpy. You can be mean. Just want to share that with you. And sometimes that makes it hard to have our friendship. Now, the person is at a choice point. Some people say, that's not true. No, I'm not. And some people say, I'll let that in. I'll think about that. Now, here's an interesting one. Some people say, I think you're that way. It's like this defensive move. Years and years ago, I had a friend who worked for the CIA. And he gave me this great, marvelous little button that said, admit nothing, deny everything, make vicious counter-accusations. Not exactly a plan for healthy friendships or partners. Somebody says to you, you know, you are just the most caring person I know, but you kind of have this idea that you have to run around helping everyone. And I don't see how you can do that in the pressure you put on yourself. There's this axial moment here to let that in. Some people you say that to and they say, I know that about myself, so what? Which means they're not interested in getting past the self-awareness. They have no intention of changing. I led a counseling group once for graduate students, and it was a group of 12, and we all had to go and say, what's a way that you would like to grow as a person? And we got to this one person, and the person said, I'm all good the way I am, thanks anyway. Well, sometimes the world and God won't let us get away with that. So Christianity is a following of Christ that leads to transformation. We always ask questions about congregations. How many? How much? What are they doing? But maybe a really good question would be asked, is that congregation a place where people are transformed? Is that a place where people are, because they're a member of that church, growing as a human being and growing as a Christian? Will people who have visited us be different as a result of having been with us? This is this transformational process that's easily forgotten, that is part of the following of Christ. No thanks, I'm all good the way I am. Yeah, I know that about myself, I don't care. You got to get used to it. This is what's going on in the gospel story today. And this is Luke. This is the author we call Luke. And Luke brings us the Christmas story. The angels appear, and they sing, "Glory to God in the highest, peace on earth, goodwill to all people." But this is the same author who's telling us Jesus said, "I haven't come to bring peace. I've come to bring division." Jesus the disruptor. That's true too. Fire, I want to set it on ablaze. I have a baptism to be baptized with, and I can't wait until it's done, because then the blaze will be set. He's not talking about when he gets dunked in the Jordan. He's talking about his crucifixion. The crucifixion will set everything ablaze from the small flame it is when Jesus preaches this. Christianity is really strange. It's weird. It goes against the ways that we think, that the world teaches us. Jesus says in the Gospel of John, "No greater love has anyone than this, that they lay down their own life for their friend." We hear fire, and we think right away, our Christian thoughts, oh, that's hell. Or that's nuclear disaster, or what? No, that's not what's going on here. Luke is the same author who tells us the story of Pentecost. They are gathered in a room, and they're chickens. They're really afraid. And tongues of fire come upon and hover over each of them. Fire is a sign and a symbol of cleansing love. It's a sign of the Spirit active in our lives. It purifies. Fire purifies. Long ago, in the 14th century, this writer, Dante, you might have heard of Dante. Dante wrote a novel called Paradiso, which has this part called the Inferno. It was a novel. He made it up out of his imagination. Just like J.K. Rowling made up Harry Potter. Now, nobody's going around the world looking for where the castle was where Harry Potter. It's a novel, it's imaginative. But after Dante, Christians took this stuff literally. God is one who punishes with fire, who creates pain with fire. God is a God of vengeance who sends fire, and hell is the perfect. You roast on a meat hook for all eternity in eternal conscious torment. That's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. You'll search the Greek New Testament in vain for the word we translated in English as hell. It ain't there. There's these little kind of familiarisms. It's Gehenna, or the Valley of Hinnom, or Hades, which is borrowed from Greek. They didn't really have a concept of this. We made that up after Dante's Paradiso. In the New Testament, fire is always a sign of cleansing, of pruning, so that there can be health. Now, the fire which is Jesus calling down to spread on the earth is the fire of love. And sometimes love causes some pain because it's asking us to transform, to grow, to change. And sometimes we don't want that. We'd prefer to keep gathering in churches throughout the country and saving ourselves week after week without any kind of transformation, either of ourselves or of others. How does love burn or transform? How does it prune? My friend Jim is a recently retired clinical psychologist. And Jim tells this story. He says, when he was in training at Fuller in California to be a clinical psychologist, one unit that he had to do was to spend time for a semester on a ward which was recovery for drugs and alcohol. He didn't know much about this. But on one weekend, he was asked to come on this weekend, which was held so that people could begin rehab and recovery as alcoholics or drug addicts. Now, Jim was allowed to be part of this special ritual. So there were about 30 men, because this was a men's weekend. There were about 30 men who had been in the recovery program sometimes for decades, sometimes for a few years. And these 30 men would gather in the room where Jim was. Now, Jim, as a psychology student, was let in on this secret. The young man who was coming in to begin his rehabilitation and recovery was an out-of-control alcoholic. And one day, in his drunken stupor, he had his little child, 1.5 years old, in the car seat in the back seat. And he was supposed to get the child to the sitters, where the child would spend the day. But he noticed that a bar was open. And he thought, I'll just go in there for a quick drink to steady my nerves. He left the child in the car. It was winter. Very cold outside, snow and ice. I'll go in there for one quick drink. And I'll come right out just to steady my nerves. 5 hours later, he comes out of the bar. The child had severe hypothermia, was unable to hear in one ear, which had been frostbitten. His young dad, not prepared for fatherhood, alcoholic. He's coming in for rehab. There's some people who would say, who could forgive this guy for that? Who could forgive him for something so terrible? Doesn't he deserve to burn in eternal conscious torment so God can get back at him for that pain that he caused, that injury to that child, to his own child? Who would do that? Now, the circle of men who were in recovery was there. And the psychologist was in a chair, and an empty chair right there in front of the psychologist. And the door opens, and this scared, terrified, skinny young man, barely able to grow a beard, comes in and looks at all the men gathered. Looks at the psychologist. The psychologist says, "Have a seat." The young man sits down in the seat. He's shaking. The psychologist says, "What do you love most in your life?" The young man says, my wife. And all of the men in a giant chorus yell at their loudest, bull feathers. They didn't say bull feathers. Bull feathers. Psychologist says again, what do you love most in your life? This is hurting this young man. It's too much truth-telling. It's asking for transformation to begin. What do you love most in your life? And the young man says, my children. And everyone yells the same thing. Bull. The man's shaking. Psychologist says, I'll ask one more time. What do you love most in your life? The young man's looking at the other men in recovery. He's looking at the psychologist. And he says, alcohol. And at that moment, all 30 men rise to their feet and give this young guy a standing ovation that goes on for 5 minutes. And then the men line up and they walk up to the young man and embrace him. And this young guy is weeping. And you know that never in his life has he been shown this kind of love, ever. Love hurts sometimes. It involves telling the truth. Jesus, I wish to set the world ablaze with this kind of love. In the program, it's sometimes called tough, tender love. But all love calls us, especially the love of God, the love of Christ, so that when we show this act of love, it's like the angels are giving us a 5-minute standing ovation. Well done. Well done, thinking of that other person. Well done working on yourself to grow. It's fun to learn things. We hear the gospel today. It's not something about nuclear destruction or God's being an angry, wrathful fellow. It's rather that the God who is love, the New Testament tells us, is for us and for our growth and healing. And what could be better good news, gospel, than this?